It's time again for another installment of the basics, and on today's show I'm going back into the Star Trek card game again, and I want to focus on the Hirogen, because I didn't really do them justice in a previous episode when I considered them a weak race, but I've reconsidered some of what I said, and I'm going to do this whole episode based on the Hirogen and building a deck with them. Now, the Hirogen aren't one of the strongest affiliations in the game, which is surprising because they are a pretty aggressive and ruthless enemy in the Voyager TV series. But, that aside, they do have some decent ships and personnel, and you could make a deck around them, but it's tricky. Now, these are pretty much all of the Hirogen cards that I have. When the expansion called the Borg came out, there weren't as many good Hirogen cards peppered in the expansion packs. A lot of commons and uncommons and not many rares. But, that having been said, their ships are interesting. So they're light cruiser, range 7, weapons X, shields 9. So you already have good shields, and the X under weapons, X equals 7 plus the number of your other staffed Hirogen ships here. So it's cumulative. The more Hirogen ships, the more weapons you have, and it makes it harder on your opponent to get by. The Venatic class Hunter, range 9, weapons 10, shields 12. That's a nice ship. The problem is staffing the Hirogen ships. Again, there's a lot of personnel that are common and uncommon. They don't have the best attributes. Cards like Dekaran is a good card to have with his many attributes. Taranj. Netek is very good because look what he has. Transporter skill, navigation, geology, stellar cartography, and exobiology. And he has a command level icon, which a lot of them seem to have, but then they start getting lower into the attributes. Again, this is all the personnel I have for Hirogen, so I was never able to put together an actual Hirogen deck. And that being said, I only have, I think, one Hirogen mission that I ever got in an expansion booster pack. But, luckily, in the Voyager and the Borg expansion, there are missions that anybody can attempt for the Delta Quadrant that can come in handy. Their ranges are high, which means it takes a while to get over to the next one. But still, there's a lot of decent missions with decent points for the Delta Quadrant, and you can put those into a Hirogen deck. I would more use those than the actual Hirogen affiliated missions because they're easier to come by and you can complete them as well. Back to the personnel. You really have to get a lot of Hirogen personnel to make a decent deck because the Hirogen is the affiliation that depends on having many ships, more than you'd have in a normal deck. Now normally I advocate 2, 3, 4 ships at the most, with the fourth being a shuttlecraft or a runabout or something like a support craft. In a Hirogen deck, you want to have 5 or 6 ships because it works out better for the fleet mentality and for pack hunting if you're going after your opponent. That means you need a lot of personnel. So you're going to need a lot of the personnel that have the universal icons. You can have many more of them. And this has been a problem for me, which is why I never really made a Hirogen deck because it was really hard to get those personnel. Now, after everything I just covered, I would like to add that the Hirogen is probably the one affiliation that you're going to want to use a lot of non-aligned personnel with in a deck with them. And that creates a problem because you have to use non-aligned personnel from the Delta Quadrant, from the Voyager or the Borg or whatever expansion, and there's not as many non-aligned personnel as there is for, say, the Gamma Quadrant even, or even where the base of the cards exist in the Alpha Quadrant, where there are tons and tons of non-aligned personnel. So you really have to be careful when you're building a Hirogen deck. You got to put a lot more thought into it than you would normally. That's all for today. Have a great day, everybody.